Chapter 22. The Unseen River. Lena was the first to wake, and what she saw made her drop the pot she had gone to fill with water. It clanged against the dirt but didn't roll far. The ground had changed. Everything had changed. She stood there at the tree line, staring out, barefoot and trembling, as if moving too quickly would confirm what her eyes refused to accept. A river now circled the campsite, a river that had not been there when they went to sleep. Not a stream, not runoff, a full, dark, roaring river, 30 feet wide at its narrowest, flowing in a perfect loop around their camp like a ring. The sun was just cresting the eastern ridge, and already its light seemed dimmer, filtered through air that had thickened overnight. And in the water, something moved, something that didn't make a splash. Behind her, the sound of a tent zipper rasped open. Footsteps crunched softly on the pine needles. "Lena, that you?" It was Jonah, rubbing sleep from his eyes, hoodie half on, his hair sticking up in every direction. When he saw her face, he stopped. Then he followed her gaze. "What the hell?" The others stirred soon after. One by one they emerged, groggy and muttering, until the first silence settled over the camp. Nobody spoke once they saw it. The river flowed fast, but without the usual sounds of rushing water. No bubbling, no swirling eddies. It moved in a smooth sheet, too clean, too quiet. The trees across the current stood untouched and identical, each one mirrored so perfectly in the water that their reflection looked more solid than real. Mila approached the edge slowly and crouched. She dipped a stick in. The moment it touched the surface, it vibrated violently and snapped in half. What the hell is this? Charlie crouched beside her and stared down. There's no bottom. He tried again, tossing a pebble in, and watched it vanish instantly beneath the glass-like surface. Did you hear it hit? No. He tried again, throwing a larger stone. It vanished silently, like it had been swallowed mid-air. No splash, no trace. Just gone. "We camped in the middle of a valley, right?" Mila looked up at Lena. "You hiked the perimeter with me. You remember what was here." Lena nodded slowly. Grass, pine, dry ground, no water for miles. Jonah was pacing near the fire pit, hands on his head. "Okay, so let's just follow it. It can't loop around forever. We find a shallow point or a crossing." They did just that. Split into two pairs, one moving clockwise and the other counter. Charlie and Lena took the left route. Mila and Jonah walked the other side. 30 minutes later, they returned. No end, no gap, no inlet. The river was a ring, a perfect circle encircling their entire campsite like a moat. No bridges, no rocks to jump, no trees leaning far enough to reach. And it was wider now. Charlie was the first to say it. "I think it's moving inward." They marked the bank with a long branch laid flat at the edge. 10 minutes later, the stick had disappeared beneath the flow. They tried calling for help, but there was no signal. Even the satellite phone in Charlie's pack, which had connected the night before, now blinked red and dead. By noon, the river had advanced 3 more feet. Lena stared at the far side again. "That's not the same tree line. Look, that tree was snapped before. Now it's whole." She was right. Charlie confirmed it. The entire mirrored forest on the far bank had subtly rearranged, like the river wasn't just a barrier, it was a lens, and what they were seeing across it might not have been a reflection, or even reality. Jonah tried to skip a rock. It vanished. Mila tied a length of rope around a chunk of firewood and threw it in. They waited, hand on the line. The rope went slack instantly, then pulled tight, then slack again. She reeled it back in. The rope came back soaked in something thick, not water, almost like oil, and it hissed in the sunlight. They dropped it. "No more throwing things in," Jonah said. "That thing has rules. We don't know them, and I think it gets angry." Charlie was pacing now, muttering to himself. The sun had stopped moving. It was past noon, but the shadows remained unchanged. Time was stalling. The birds were silent. Not a single insect buzzed. They gathered at the fire pit. Mila counted the food. "We've got maybe 2 days of clean water, less if it gets hotter. We'll need to start collecting dew, ration the rest." Charlie looked at the narrowing space between them and the river's edge. "We're running out of space. If it keeps closing in, we'll be standing shoulder to shoulder before the second night." As if on cue, something moved on the far bank. Jonah saw it first. His breath caught. A figure, humanoid, tall, hunched. It emerged from the trees, stopped at the water's edge and stared. It was impossible to make out features. It had no color, just a gray, mottled silhouette. And when it moved, it did not walk. It glided, smooth as the water itself. "There's something over there," Jonah said quietly. They all turned to look, and when they did, it had gone. Then a splash, not from across, from behind them. Lena turned fast, flashlight in hand, even though it was still daylight. The river's edge had moved again, and now a wet, dark shape sat at the new boundary. It was not a body, not fully formed. It had no limbs, but it had weight, and it left marks in the dirt, heavy impressions, slow, dragging lines, like something had clawed its way from the water and then melted back into the earth. "We are not alone in here," Mila whispered. Charlie stepped forward. "It left tracks. It's not a ghost." "No, just something worse." That night they built a barrier of rocks and branches around their sleeping area, not because they believed it would help, but because they needed to try something. They took turns on watch. Charlie had the second shift, just past midnight. The river glowed faintly in the starlight, its black surface no longer smooth but rippling just beneath the surface like something large swam just out of sight. At one point he thought he saw a head break the surface. It was shaped wrong, too round, too featureless. It slipped away without a sound. By morning, the river had halved the space again. Their entire campsite now fit into a 30-foot circle. The fire pit, their tents, their gear. Beyond that, nothing but water. And the forms were appearing more often now. 5 of them, watching from the far side, then vanishing, then appearing, closer. Mila lost it first. She grabbed a tarp, a rope, and her trekking poles and tied together a crude raft. "What are you doing?" Jonah snapped. "I am not waiting to be swallowed," she said. "I'm crossing. I'll make it. I have to." They tried to stop her. She ran. By the time she reached the edge and launched the raft, the figures across the river had vanished. She paddled furiously. Halfway across, the raft slowed. The current beneath the surface reversed. Charlie screamed her name. She looked back, terror in her eyes. Then the raft folded inward, crushed like a paper cup. Mila vanished. Not a splash, just gone. The river rolled on. And the far bank? It was closer now. And this time, it was Lena who saw it. The trees weren't trees anymore. They were forms, like her, like the others, only still, waiting. Jonah had not spoken since Mila disappeared. He stood at the edge of the campsite for an hour, silent and still, the faint spray from the river misting his arms. Lena tried to pull him back, but he didn't respond, not even when she yelled his name. Charlie finally stepped between them and led Jonah away by the shoulders. The man followed like a puppet, eyes glassy, footsteps slow. They laid him against one of the last remaining pines and wrapped him in a sleeping bag. He didn't blink. His lips moved occasionally, but no sound came out. Lena sat beside him, holding his hand. She wasn't sure whether she was comforting him or herself. The sky was darker now, not just from clouds, but as if something above the trees was draining the light. A haze hung over the river. The flow of water had slowed slightly, but that only made the presence of the black shapes more pronounced. There were more of them now, not just 5, 8 maybe, or 10. Some slithered under the surface like massive leeches. Others drifted like jellyfish, their forms too long, too segmented to be anything natural. And then there were the walkers. They moved upright, pacing along the far bank, matching every step the campers made. Charlie had counted 6 that resembled human figures. 3 were his height. 1 looked almost exactly like Lena from a distance. But they were wrong in the way mannequins are wrong, lacking motion in the joints, heads swiveling too smoothly, standing still for unnatural lengths of time. They didn't make sounds. They didn't breathe. But when he blinked, they were always a few feet closer. That evening, the circle of land left was barely 20 feet across. The fire pit was now right at the center. The tents had been dismantled for space. Supplies were stacked high to avoid contact with the encroaching river. The edge hissed when the wind blew across it, not from temperature or flow, but from the wrongness of it, like the river was pushing air that hadn't been touched by the world in centuries. Lena stared at one of the watchers across the river. It stood taller than the others, maybe 7 feet. Its arms hung past its knees, and its face was featureless. Not blank, featureless. No eyes, no mouth, No skin, only a surface that moved like fluid under pressure. It tilted its head and stepped forward, but instead of making a ripple, the water moved around its feet like memory instead of mass. "We're not supposed to see them," she said softly. Charlie was sitting nearby, sharpening the edge of a broken tent pole. "What do you mean?" "They were already here, before the river, maybe before the valley. The water's just the way we start noticing." The sun did not set properly that night. Instead, the sky dimmed to a gray that never quite reached black. Stars refused to appear. Time lost its meaning. They took turns resting, but sleep came in fragments, shallow and filled with dreams of drowning. Jonah began speaking again around what might have been 2 in the morning. His voice was low and rhythmic, repeating the same phrase again and again. "He sees us. He sees us. He sees us." Lena sat him up and held him by the shoulders. "Jonah, who sees us?" He stared through her. "There's a mouth in the river. We're circling its teeth." Charlie approached. "What do you mean?" "It's not water. It's skin. A wall of it. We're standing on its tongue, and it's closing." Charlie knelt beside him. "Tell me what you see." Jonah pointed a shaking finger toward the water. "Not there. Down. He sees us." He fell backward and convulsed. They held him down until it passed, then laid him back in the sleeping bag. Lena looked at Charlie. "He's not crazy. Not any more than we are." The ground shifted beneath them. Just slightly. A tremor. Almost like breathing. Charlie stood fast. He ran to the nearest edge and threw one of the remaining flare sticks into the water. It sank instantly, glowing bright orange, but instead of vanishing, it hovered beneath the surface. Then it revealed something else. A wall. Not a floor, a wall beneath them, covered in spires. Teeth, or something like them. Long ridges, bony structures layered like the gill slots of a whale. It wasn't a river at all. It was a membrane, a living surface beneath them. And the water wasn't water. It was part of the thing. Lena covered her mouth. "It's alive." The watchers across the river had moved closer, now only 15 feet away. The river's edge pulsed with each heartbeat. Charlie dragged gear toward the center. "We build a tower, high as we can. We stay off the ground." "It's not afraid of height," Lena said. "Then maybe it's afraid of something else." Jonah began speaking again. "He is waking. You called him. With your fire. With your breath. You told stories and he listened." Charlie froze. "What did you say?" Jonah's voice changed. It was no longer his tone. It was a whisper that passed through his throat like a gust through reeds. His eyes rolled white. "The circle burns. The watchers wait. The offering nears its edge. Step in and be seen." Charlie shook him. "Jonah, snap out of it!" Jonah's mouth opened wider than human anatomy allowed, and a sound emerged, a deep rumbling that came not from his lungs, but from the ground itself. It made the river shiver. It made the trees bend. The watchers turned as one. Lena grabbed the flare gun. "We can't stay." "We have nowhere to go," Charlie said. "We make somewhere." She fired the flare straight into the sky. The red light arced high, trailing sparks, then exploded. The smoke was thick and oily. Charlie turned back to the watchers. They were gone. So was the far bank. Now there was only water. All directions. The forest had vanished. The trees behind them were still, but every step now echoed as if they stood alone in a chamber. The world had closed around them. Lena fell to her knees. "It's feeding. It fed Mila to itself. It's using us to stay open." Jonah screamed. His body arced. A seam split down the center of his chest. It didn't bleed. Something black began to pour out, not liquid, not solid, like smoke that had learned to crawl. Charlie grabbed Lena and pulled her back. Jonah's body twitched once more and then stopped. The thing inside him rose. It was shaped like a man, but it was not human. Its skin was translucent, veins twitching beneath the surface. Its eyes were rows of small, mirrored orbs. Its limbs bent the wrong way, and it didn't stand so much as float just inches above the ground. Charlie threw a bottle of lamp fuel and lit it mid-air. The thing ignited, but it didn't scream. It stepped forward through the flame. Then it stopped, and it listened to the water. Then it folded in on itself and vanished, leaving nothing but Jonah's body still twitching slightly. The river pulsed again, and from the water came sound, like breathing, like a name. Lena, Charlie, one of you must walk. Charlie could feel the name even after the sound had stopped. It wasn't spoken into his ears. It had crawled in through the bones behind his eyes, whispered directly into the center of his thoughts, like a memory returning uninvited. It knew them, knew their names, their patterns, their blood. Lena had collapsed beside him, breathing fast and shallow. Her fingernails were pressed into her palms hard enough to draw blood. Her skin glistened with cold sweat, and her pupils were too wide. She was staring into the water again, not at her reflection, at something beneath it. "I saw it," she said in a thin voice. "I saw its face. It was mine." Charlie stood slowly and backed away from the edge, pulling her with him. There was no longer a clear sense of space. The area around them had stopped shrinking visibly, but the pressure of the water had increased. He could feel it, a quiet heaviness in his ears and lungs, like they were trapped under a deep tide even above ground. Their gear was scattered, much of it wet or useless now. Jonah's body was still sprawled where it had fallen, the broken edges of his ribs poking from his torn shirt. There was no sign of Mila or the makeshift raft, no way to know how much time had passed since the flare. Charlie checked the flashlight. The beam flickered and then died completely. The backup did the same. There was no sun anymore, just a dull glow that did not change, flat and gray like a sky painted over a prison ceiling. He tore open the last chemical light stick and cracked it. A sickly green glow spread from the center of the camp. It cast long, unnatural shadows that did not behave correctly. Lena's shadow moved against her body when she turned. His own seemed to stretch further than the angle should have allowed. "We need to move," Charlie said. "We have to find something, anything that breaks the loop. If this is alive, there has to be a boundary, a spine, a point it can't bend." "What if there isn't one?" Lena whispered. "Then we make one." He helped her stand. They gathered what was left, a length of rope, 3 fire-starting tablets, half a liter of clean water, a climbing axe, and a hunting knife. Charlie still had the flare gun, now empty, and a magnesium whistle that hadn't worked since the pressure began to build. They tied the rope around each other's waists and set off in the only direction that remained, the one where the watchers had vanished. They didn't walk far. After just 20 or 30 steps, the sound of water began to return, not from behind, but ahead. The river was looping again, closing even that final path. "Wait," Lena said. "Look." She pointed to the edge of the flow, where the ground sloped down toward what used to be the forest. Something jutted from the water, a stone pillar or something close to it, dark gray and veined with roots. It rose at an angle, barely 3 feet wide and 10 tall, bent like a spine or a rib from some fossilized creature. Its base disappeared into the water, and its top was etched with deep cuts, worn with age. "A marker," Charlie said. "It's marking something." Lena approached carefully. Her boots touched the edge of the river, but the water did not react. The watchers were gone again, for now. She traced her fingers across the markings. They weren't letters, not in any language she recognized. They were symbols, angular, interlocked, spiraling in layers around the pillar's face. She ran her hand over one, and it felt warm, alive. Charlie felt it too. A pulse, not from the pillar, but from the air itself. Something had changed. A sound emerged. Not a voice, not a vibration, just a tone, a single note rising from the river like breath escaping from a mouth that had just opened for the first time in centuries. The pillar shuddered, and the river flashed bright white along the surface, just once, like lightning under the water. Then silence again. "Did we activate something?" Lena asked. Charlie shook his head. "No, we were acknowledged."
Beneath the water, shapes began to rise, slowly, carefully, not lunging or rushing, but ascending with purpose. Their forms were clearer now, transparent bodies filled with dark threads, limbs that rotated without joints, heads that split and reformed with each turn. And there were many of them, Hundreds, maybe more, surfacing just beneath the current, watching from behind a veil of fluid and distance. Charlie pulled Lena back. "Keep moving." They stayed close to the riverbank, using the pillar as a landmark. As they moved, more stone shapes emerged from the edge, half submerged, some cracked, others still whole. Each one bore different symbols, different sounds echoed from the river as they passed. Notes from a song older than language, a song they weren't meant to hear. Lena stumbled and cried out. Charlie turned just in time to see her fall. She had tripped on something buried beneath the moss. He knelt and pulled it free. A piece of plastic, a broken GPS beacon, still flashing red. "This is ours," he said, "from yesterday, from before the river." Lena looked around. "So we've circled again?" "Not just circled," he said. "Folded. It's folding the landscape, reusing it, like a machine trapped in a loop, using pieces of us to finish a pattern." "Then we're not even walking anymore," she said. "We're being moved." Charlie dropped the beacon. "We keep going." They walked until the markers vanished again, until the sky dimmed to sad time. The watchers returned with the darkness, no longer at the edges, but now standing between the trees that weren't supposed to exist anymore. Their bodies shimmered like heat mirages. Their faces wore no expression, but each one had hands outstretched now, waiting. Lena stopped. "I think they're mimicking us." Charlie looked around. There were watchers of different sizes, postures, even wearing shreds of familiar shapes. One wore a jacket like Mila's, another stood with a tilt identical to Jonah's. One had his own exact gait. "We're not just being watched," he said. "We're being recorded." And then a voice, low, massive, coming from beneath the earth itself. "Step in." Lena screamed and turned. She pulled Charlie with her and they ran. The ground shook once. The river broke its flow. Water splashed, rising as if thrown by a massive force. Something beneath them turned. Something with size. They ran until their legs gave out. They collapsed beneath another tree that should not have been there. Roots wrapped around it like ribs. Its bark was soft like skin. Its branches bent toward them, and from it came breath. A hole opened beneath Lena. Charlie grabbed her hand. "Don't let go!" she screamed. Something pulled. He held her with both arms. "Don't let go!" Then the river spoke again. "Only one may leave." The roots beneath Lena's feet gave way as the hole widened, sucking soil and moss into a churning throat of shifting black tendrils and liquid motion. Charlie gripped her wrists with all the strength he had left, the pressure threatening to rip her arms from their sockets. Her legs were already submerged past the knees, the living earth swallowing her in slow, jerking pulls. He braced his foot against the tree's base, ignoring the sharp, wet heat that began to radiate from its bark. It pulsed, not like a tree, but like a body, like muscle under skin. The hole beneath Lena began to whisper. Not words, vibrations, fragmented memory, sounds Charlie had only heard once before, years ago, standing outside a hospital room where someone he loved died slowly. It was the sound of distant monitors, failing breath, and voices praying to a God no longer listening. And beneath all of that was something else, a call. "Charlie," Lena sobbed, "please." He pulled harder. His arms burned. Her skin was slick with moisture, not from sweat, but from the same substance that clung to the river's edge. It was thick and luminous in the dark, a slow drying glue that seemed to stretch and flex like it was alive. He gave one last violent tug, and her legs popped free with a wet sound like tearing cloth. They collapsed together, gasping. Her legs were covered in a translucent film. Beneath it, her veins were no longer blue, but black, pulsing with a sluggish rhythm. Charlie touched her thigh, and she cried out, the skin too hot to the touch, too thin, like it would tear if he pressed. They sat in the silence, the earth no longer shifting, the roots settling again, as if disappointed. Lena's breathing slowed, but it was shallow. She wouldn't last much longer. Charlie looked at the river. It was no longer flowing. It had become a perfect mirror, not of the sky above, but of what lay beneath them. He saw the watchers gathered in the reflection, standing in a circle. In the middle, a figure sat on a throne of bone and stone, massive and faceless, its body half submerged in liquid shadow. It moved without sound, raising one long arm and pointing at him. "Only one may leave." The voice didn't echo, it existed inside him now. It was not making an offer, it was stating a rule. A mechanism within the forest had been triggered, and the system required resolution. The trap could not open until a condition was met. Lena clutched his arm. "You go." Charlie looked down at her. Her face had changed in the dim light, hollowed, her lips cracked, skin pale, dark stains blooming up her neck beneath the surface. Her pupils had become slits, no longer reacting to the glow stick or the faint ambient light. She was slipping, and she knew it. "You get out," she said. "Finish the story. Tell people what happened here." He shook his head. "I'm not leaving you. You have to, or it all resets." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the emergency beacon. It was cracked, soaked through, but its light still blinked, a weak signal, trying to scream into a dead sky. She pushed it into his hand. "This needs to get out." He held her hand, shaking. "You don't even know if that will help." "Maybe not," she whispered, "but if it doesn't, then no one will ever know to avoid this place." The watchers stood motionless. The figure in the reflection remained seated, arms still raised. Charlie closed his eyes. His thoughts splintered. He wanted to stay, to fight, to drag her with him if there was a way out. But some part of him understood now. This wasn't just a trap. It was a ritual, a cycle, and it always ended with a choice. He rose to his feet, every limb aching, muscles trembling from exhaustion and terror. Lena didn't move. She closed her eyes and leaned back against the tree, her breaths coming slower. The glowing veins beneath her skin began to pulse brighter. Charlie turned and walked toward the river. The water parted. Not all the way, but enough to form a path, only 10 feet across. Beyond it, the forest shimmered. Familiar trees, the original trailhead, sunlight filtering through leaves, real light, not the flat gray of the trapped dome. He stepped to the edge, the wet grass hissing under his boots. He looked back one last time. Lena raised a hand weakly. Her fingers were glowing now, her face calm. "Go." Charlie stepped into the river. The surface collapsed around him like silk tearing under pressure, and the moment his foot touched the center of the path, the sound returned. Not screams, not words, just sound. A roar of all the lives the forest had swallowed, all the choices made by strangers who vanished from maps and memories. The water didn't drown him, it cradled him, pushed him forward with quiet hands. A tunnel of light formed ahead, shifting between colors. He saw images in the walls, faces, some he knew, some that didn't belong to anyone living. He saw Mila's last moment on the raft, Jonah's body warping, a group of campers from another decade huddled under tarps, firelight dancing across their terrified eyes. And then the tunnel spat him out. He hit the ground hard, dirt and pine needles, real air, real sun. He turned over and vomited water that wasn't water. It steamed in the daylight and evaporated instantly. When he sat up, the forest was silent again, but it was the kind of silence that belonged to normal wilderness, not the stillness of something holding its breath. He was out. He activated the beacon. The signal light was steady now, blinking red with purpose. He stumbled toward the nearest ridge, knowing a ranger tower stood somewhere within a few miles. His body ached. His hand throbbed from holding Lena too tightly. Her blood was on his pants, her final breath still fresh in his memory. At the top of the ridge he looked back. The river was gone. No sign of it, not even a patch of wet ground, just empty forest. But he could still hear the water in his ears, still feel its weight in his chest. And as he began walking again, the sound faded, until it became something else. Laughter. A low, hollow laugh. Not mocking, just hungry. Because something had been fed, and it was satisfied for now.
Thank you for listening to this story. Your support means a lot and helps keep these tales coming. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to subscribe and follow for more dark and immersive stories just like this one. New horrors await. Don't miss what's coming next.